Hey, 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 email geeks, welcome in. Your favorite podcast, the Email Design Podcast, where we talk about all things email design, development, and marketing. We are your hosts. I'm Kevin Mandeville.
And I'm Jason Rodriguez.
Coming up today, we're going to be answering your questions from the Litmus community. We just want to let you know before we dive into that, you can catch the podcast at emaildesignpodcast.com. All the show notes, links, everything we discussed, it's all right there. All the past episodes too. We're over 80 episodes now. Tweet along with the hashtag Email Design Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, SoundCloud, and iTunes. And please, if you're listening, give us a nice little review on iTunes, maybe nice little 5 stars or something. We would appreciate that. And so yeah, just you can check out the podcast there. So today we're going straight to the Litmus community, litmus.com/community, taking your questions that you've asked recently and given our answers for you. So hopefully we can help you along the way. So Jason, what are we kicking off with today?
Yeah, the first one's a great question from Paul Airy, talking about process for email design. So I feel like this discussion's come up a few times over the past couple of years in the community, but he's essentially asking, what's your approach to actually design an email? Do you start with a concept first? Do you sketch that out? Do you, jump into Photoshop, or do you go straight to the coding aspect of email development? So there's a couple of great answers here. Ted goes from Stack Overflow, kind of lays out his approach. He starts with his functional spec. That's using a template that Jay Jun shared with Litmus Conference back in 2014. He tries to get consensus around what the goal of the email is, gets copy, all that stuff going, and then he jumps into Sketch, starts sharing mock-ups through, Google Docs, InVision, Trello board, stuff like that. And then only after he has consensus for all this stuff in the email design, he jumps into the actual code. And it seems like the other answers in this thread follow a similar approach. There's a couple of people from an agency setting that do things in a similar way, where they work with copywriters first. They get all of their ducks in a row before they start coding and getting into the development process. So I know us at Litmus, we tend to follow a similar approach. We use Google Docs pretty heavily to flesh out the goal of the email campaign, to get copy in order, subject line, preview text, all of those elements. And then we start jumping into the code. But I know for like more personal projects or like kind of one-off emails, I feel like you and I, Kevin, are more liable to just jump into the code right away, design in the browser, and, effectively write copy and stuff in the browser if we're just working on things on our own. So really good question. So I'm really curious to see what other email geeks are saying and what their process is for actually designing and developing email campaigns.
Yeah, I moved away from actually truly designing emails, a long time ago. Actually, I didn't even really design a whole lot of emails to begin with. It's just with the dev tools today and how far CSS has come, it's just so fast to iterate in the browser now, for me anyways, that I love just prototyping stuff up there and actually getting a feel for the design. I only typically ever open up a design program if I'm really trying to do something flashy or just, I guess, in-depth, if I'm using like a lot of background images or gradients, textures, things like that I need to get a better feel for, which are maybe not as ideal to work with in CSS, manually, pure hand through the browser. And especially, with Litmus Builder, which is, obviously we're partial, but that's what I use, just being able to test a lot as you go.
Yep.
I just find that super helpful. So yeah, I'm not one of these fancy design programs people anymore. I just kind of design in the browser and get straight to it, which is kind of my workflow, which definitely has its shortcomings, I'm sure, for making things more bespoke and thinking about things a little bit more. But at least that's what I prefer nowadays.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't remember the last time I opened up like Photoshop or Sketch or something to design an email or like a web page for that matter. It's more just code right from the beginning. You get a feel for what's possible, what's possible in HTML and CSS. And you kind of design with that in mind, which I think speeds up that process greatly. But I do recognize the need for, especially larger teams and agencies, to go through this process, have specs up front, get all the copy in order, do mock-ups and things like that to provide to stakeholders. I would still argue they could do all that in code and provide that code to stakeholders so they can see it in the browser. But I do recognize that need for different teams and different processes.
Yeah, it's That's definitely just what we prefer individually. So we're just sharing our own take,
Yeah.
and we try to keep it pretty lean over here at Litmus with our own workflow. So that kind of helps streamlines it, like you said. But yeah, I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just about what works for you and your team, so to speak. So getting into this next question, the everlasting topic, it feels like, around Android. Issei asked a question around media queries in Android 5.0 and Android 6.0 not working, and specifically around getting to hide and show. So there's a couple things relayed here into the question and taking a look at the code. I would say number one, just to point out in the code, there is the use of attribute selectors in the CSS here, which is a no-no now in email. The reason why we used to have to use attribute selectors once upon a time was due to a Yahoo Mail bug, where any CSS inside of a media query that did not use attribute selectors were going to essentially not be rendered. So that was a hack around Yahoo Mail, which no longer exists, and there's no need for it. And it actually is detrimental nowadays because Gmail doesn't support attribute selectors. So any CSS style block that has an attribute selector in it, it's going to strip out the entire style block. So you want to make sure you're just using regular classes, regular IDs, and you're just avoiding those. Secondly, to get back to the Android 5.0 and 6.0, again, this topic we keep coming up, but we want to hammer it home. Starting on Android 5.1 and above, Android defaulted to the Gmail app as the default installed email app. So Gmail app supports media queries by default. There's a couple edge cases, but by default, Gmail app, it supports media queries. So as long as you're avoiding this attribute selector here, you should be avoiding that issue. On 4.4 and below, though, it used the native vanilla email app of the Android operating system. Android, it's its own OS. It's its own open source operating system. It comes with its own email app. That's what they use as the default installed app on 4.4 and below, which supported media queries. But then in 5.1 and above, again, it switched to Gmail, but then the native email app of the Android OS, it still exists as a part of the Android OS, but it's not default installed anywhere. But starting on 5.1 and above, that vanilla email app of the Android OS, it no longer supports media queries. So I think this is a case of understanding what you're trying to target on Android for an actual app and making sure you're using what Gmail would consider to be valid CSS so that you don't run into any issues there.
Love it. Got it. I feel like we need to do like a huge educational campaign or something around this Android stuff because it's a perennial question and people are always asking about it. So it'd be good to clear that up. But one of these days we'll tackle it.
We did a whole Gmail webinar too. I'll include it in the show notes. We did a whole Gmail webinar and we touched on this Android topic. So there's like a 45-minute webinar, hour-long webinar that we did all on this, which will really have you covered for any questions you have that you should check out.
Nice. All right, moving on. Lee Hardaway posted about importing videos into an Outlook HTML template. So she mentioned that she was having trouble importing video into an Outlook HTML email file. When she saves that file with video embedded in the code, video will play in the HTML editor, but not in Outlook email. So it seems like she's just kind of misunderstanding the support for video in email. Video and email doesn't have very wide support. As we've seen over the past couple of years, it's kind of drifted in and out of support, but especially Outlook's not really going to support video in email templates. But I feel like I may very well be misunderstanding our question because I know a lot of people try to get Outlook templates in Outlook, like their Outlook specific or proprietary templates. So maybe she's trying to do the video in there as opposed to just like a straight HTML email template. Right. But I'm kind of curious what your take is on this one, Kevin.
Yeah, I think it might be the latter potentially, but I think it's just important to know. I mean, yeah, if you're not doing it through a regular HTML email, I don't think that's really going to work for you. And also just if you're talking about Outlook in the word rendering engine on Windows, it's just not going to be supported no matter what. The only area to where it would be supported would be on Outlook for Mac, which uses WebKit as a rendering engine. But apart from that, that's the only Outlook client that would support video of any kind. So, and I'm assuming we're talking about Windows here. So, regardless of the situation, it's just, I think
It's a
it
no-go.
comes down to, yeah, it's a no go. It comes down to a matter of support, unfortunately. All right. So, Laureen asks about sfr.fr client image rendering. So she was wondering if anybody knew why SFR was aligning images on the left instead of the center for them. The email looked good in all the other clients. Actually, let me open it up right now. You'll just see the image is being properly centered, both, when you're looking at it on the web view, when you're looking at it in the previews, but it's just left aligning for sfr.fr. And I can understand why it was very confusing, because when you look into her code, she actually has a line center on all of her TDs. Like, that's behaving properly, and that's why it's working in all the other clients. Just the one thing that you have to do here that I found through testing it is you just have to add a margin 0 auto to the image itself for whatever reason in sfr.fr. It might be due to her structure somehow. So you may not need to have for every instance, but I just found for this particular scenario that just adding margin 0 auto onto the image tag itself for the styling fixed it. So just a nice little simple fix for this one.
Nice. We're going to take a quick break and encourage everybody to check out Litmus. Litmus is the home of the email design podcast. It's where Kevin and I both work. It's the tool we both work on and have used for years and years. So Litmus, if you're not familiar, makes email testing, tracking, building that much easier. It allows you to test in, I keep losing track, it's almost, 90 or 100 different email clients now?
I think we're almost at 90.
Almost at 90. Okay, yeah. We've been adding a couple recently. We just added Outlook for Android, Apple Mail 11, the iPhone 10 or the iPhone X, if you want to call it, whatever. The new iPhone 8 on iOS 11. All of that's in Litmus for testing. So you can build your email campaigns using Litmus Builder. You can preview in almost 90 different email clients to see how your email campaigns actually render in those devices. So you can catch all of those problems before you actually send them out to your subscribers. We also have email analytics, which allows you to track your campaigns, get a really in-depth analytics into, where people are opening, what email clients they're using, how long they're looking at your email campaigns. We have spam testing and monitoring, things like that. All kinds of great resources for anybody that has to touch email, has to build email, and has to make sure that they're, ready to go for all their subscribers. So you can get a 14-day free trial of Litmus by going to litmus.com/gift card and using the coupon code podcast, which will give you access to all those tools. You can take them for a test run and start working them into your process. Again, we've used it for years, and I can't imagine sending an email without using Litmus in some capacity these days. So definitely check it out. Litmus also sponsors the Litmus community, which is an online resource for email marketers and designers and developers. Has things like all these discussions, which we've been going over in these podcast episodes. Has things like free templates to download, code snippets. And it has a job board, an email industry specific job board, which we like to highlight some of the more recent jobs in our podcast. So there's a couple of new ones up there. Republic Wireless in Raleigh, North Carolina is looking for a marketing automation specialist. This is a full-time position. So if you're in North Carolina, love email and love automation, then definitely check that out. Holiday Extras in Hythe, Kent in the UK is looking for an email developer. So if you're in the UK, which I feel like the UK really has a great email community. Tons of great developers over there, tons of really interesting companies doing good stuff with email. So if you want to be part of that, check out Holiday Extras over in the UK, full-time position. Pieri Inc. is looking for a remote contract senior email developer. So if you're located anywhere in the world, then definitely check that out. Litmus is a remote company. I can't imagine working any other way these days. So if you want one of those gigs, then check out Pieri Inc.'s senior email developer position. And then ITC UK in Manchester, another UK company, is looking for an email designer or developer to help out with their award-winning online casino business. So doing a lot of marketing, email campaigns, development for them. It is a full-time position over in the UK again. So definitely check that out and find your next gig on litmus.com/community/jobs.
Yeah, free to post too.
For you're looking to grow your team or anything. Yeah.
Check it out. I just have to say too, by the way, I know I mentioned this before the call. I'm here working remotely, right, at my own house, and we're getting some insulation added. And luckily, the noise is down at the moment. But that's because these guys out here just started playing football. They're just
Nice.
tossing a football, and like an American football too. I know we have a lot of UK listeners. Just an American football, just tossing it back and forth right outside my window. Most distracting thing
It's a
ever.
work break.
I'm powering
It's a
through,
work
guys.
break.
Yeah, just a little work break at like 10 a.m. in the morning. So, all right, moving on. This next one here coming at us from Alan Harris, asking around the issue of he can't get his app icons in his module to display inline. So he has a 2-column responsive template with basically the left column stacking above the right column on mobile. And he sort of has these 2 app icons, one which is Google Play, the other's the Apple App Store. And he wants to display them side by side, but they're stacking right now. And so he's asking, is this possible? So yes, it is possible. There's a couple different ways you can go about it. I guess it sort of depends on the behavior in which you want this. Do you want it to sort of go from a 2-to-1 column layout from desktop to mobile, or do you just want them stacking side by side in both? I would think for this scenario that these images are small enough that you could fit them inside a mobile so that you don't need to have them stack on one by one. But the easiest way to do it would just be to throw them into their own separate tables or table cells, depending on how you wanted them to behave. It'd be easier for them to stack as separate tables and control it that way, probably. But you could also just do them into 2 separate tables if you didn't care about the stacking responsiveness. I know you can make them stack responsive as well with table cells, but just from a layout structure, it might be easier to do it that way. Or, if you wanted to get fancy, the way I would do it is just use them as divs, set them to be display inline block, and just use Outlook conditional comments and tables just to get them to render perfectly in Outlook. And then that way you can sort of control just the div styling and display. So, very doable. It sort of depends on how you want to set it up, but there shouldn't be an issue. And I personally would try to make it just be a 2x2 or a 2x1, I should say, column layout, regardless of mobile or desktop.
Nice. Like it. All right. I like this question a lot. Joe France is asking about border radius on Bulletproof Buttons. And it seems really simple. Alan Harris replied with a simple fix for it. But it speaks to a kind of bigger discussion about how you set up your buttons. So he has this Bulletproof button that's using what I would call the border-based approach to Bulletproof Buttons. So it's using really large borders on the actual anchor tag for that button to provide that structure for the button itself. So he's wondering how you can add a border radius to that. But in his code, he's doing a couple other things that, in my mind, are a little bit odd. He has a border of 2 pixels on the table cell that contains that anchor tag. And then he has a background color on the table that wraps that entire button. So with those 2 things in place, to get these rounded corners, the border radius, he would have to apply the border radius to both the table cell and the table tags, which is exactly what Alan Harris pointed out. But a simpler way to do this to clean up the code a little bit is you could actually remove the background color on that table and then the border of 2 pixels on that table cell, just to rely on those borders on the anchor tag and then add the border radius in that one spot to the anchor tag itself. So that cleans up your code a little bit, still gives you those rounded corners, which is the look you're going for. And I think is a more kind of pure approach to that border-based Bulletproof button. But that does speak to the larger question of like, what technique should you use for Bulletproof Buttons? There's, the padding-based approach, which uses padding on the table cell as opposed to those large borders. There's kind of a hybrid approach. There's the traditional Bulletproof Button, like stigbuttons.cm approach that uses Microsoft Office's VML markup language to get all that stuff working. So this is more a question of how you want to set up your code, what Bulletproof Button approach you want to use, and then tailoring those border radius methods to that technique you're actually using.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes down to what you want to do and what type of support you want. I mean, if all you care about is just getting sort of the just having simple CSS, you could do the padding and border based approach and not worry about Outlook not rendering the border radius, right? if you need Outlook, though, you're going to have to use the buttons.cm approach of using a VML button. There's a lot of pros and cons to everything. The VML approach, if you care about that level of granularity, it'll work in Outlook, but you're having to duplicate the content. So you're having to, copy paste the link in twice, the call to action copy twice. You're basically duplicating the work for the styling on that type of button. But you can do more artistic things with VML buttons like gradients and whatnot. But the padding and border base approach is a little bit more streamlined and just sort of using, well, if it's just going to fall back in Outlook, it's not going to have rounded corners, not going to be the end of the day. But even now, I'm even moving away from the padding and border based approach and just using the simple A tag and just using, just sort of that border based approach and some Outlook reset styling, which Stig went over on that. Stig has that Outlook specific CSS article. I don't have it loaded up. I would have to go Google searching right now, but I'll find that and add that to the notes. I like doing that because then that doesn't even require a table. Yeah. That is probably the worst fallback, so to speak, for the Outlook view. But again, it still produces a clickable button at the end of the day. So as long as there's that, it's not as huge of a deal, I feel like. I don't know. I'm all about graceful degradation.
Yep.
So
I'm with you. I've been using in my own newsletters, the A tag and borders on it. So I get that fully clickable button. And then I have some MSO conditional spacing to add that extra padding on the side of the link. But don't worry about fallbacks for border radius or anything like that. It just gets that 90-degree angle corner, which I'm absolutely fine with. And I feel like most people probably would be, depending on your stakeholders and who's signing up.
It feels so clean. It's so semantic.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Love it.
It's very web-like. Love it.
Yes, exactly. All right. So last question here of the day. I wanted to touch on this. This one's coming at us from Rody. And I am abandoning any attempts at pronouncing any of these last names.
It's probably a good idea.
So this was posted a long time ago. This was posted 9 months ago, but I wanted to bring it up for a reason. And he was asking about the Outlook app on iOS and Android. It's broken with emails that aren't responsive. And so we at Litmus Live San Francisco, we came out and we announced, and we were very happy to announce there's going to be consistent media query support returning to the Outlook apps. And then that actually happened. It was rolled out within a few weeks. At the moment, I just want to point out, because I know there's been some questions around it, we put an update into that blog post, and at the moment, Outlook had to roll back media query support. The reason why they had to do this was there were some edge cases where they weren't being entirely too tolerant in the CSS for invalid CSS. So you know how Gmail right now, they don't support attribute selectors, and they would see that and they would deem that invalid CSS, and that would strip out the style block. It wasn't exactly that, but it was something akin to that, which was resulting in sort of blank emails for some users. So just wanted to point that out, that they're just sort of fixing that to be more tolerant and to improve the rendering overall. Media query support, I know it was turned on and people are like, oh, it was on, now it's back off. It's back off at the moment. It'll just be a few more weeks probably until it's back out there. And honestly, it's really just about, with a lot of this, it's really just about rolling it out to the server. It's a server side update. I should point that out. And it just takes a while for them to roll it out to their entire user base. It's really it's not about it taking so long to make the fix. It's more about the rollout for them. So I just wanted to point that out. Don't worry. I know it stinks that there had to be a rollback, but it was good that there was another issue that was found that's also getting fixed on top of that. So just look for that to come back before the end of the year. Nice Thanksgiving treat, nice holiday treat, Christmas came early, whatever you want to say for it. So look out for that. All right, that's it. Those are all our questions for today. And that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Again, don't forget emaildesignpodcast.com. Full show notes, links, past episodes. It's all right there. Check it out. See all the questions we answered today and links to the resources. Tweet along with the hashtag Email Design Podcast. Subscribe. Don't forget, subscribe on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes. Leave us some reviews, people. Give us some likes. We want to get that popularity up. And hey, free 14-day trial of Litmus. Just go to litmus.com/gift card. Coupon code podcast. All right, people. We'll see you next time.